The Rockpile Report, the pettiest, hardest drinking Bills podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Rockpile Report podcast. I'm your host, Bills season ticket holder Drew Gear. That's my producer, Chris Kruger. And when I walked in the door today, Chris was sitting at his desk drinking Pedialyte out of a coffee mug. Folks, it's hilarious because now he has a cocktail in his hand. I don't understand how we get to this place. Chris,
I have an idea. Might blow your mind. Why don't we get to the content?
Guys, a funny thing happens when you read YouTube comments. I think some of the people who because first of all, comments on YouTube or comments on iTunes or any of this, it's a lot like Yelp reviews, right? Like most of the time, if you're the type of person to leave one, I'm already discounting your opinion. Whether it's good or bad, I'm already discounting it because you're the type of person who leaves a YouTube comment.
I just want, if anybody's going to leave comments on our YouTube of anything, I want to be able to read it in the format of a comic that, we rewatch or upload a bit or material that they're working out, and the comments are people just eviscerating the comic, whether it's their bits, their looks, their hair, how they're dressed. That's how I'd like anybody that watches this to leave comments.
What is hilarious is when you get the person who goes, there's too much, you guys are doing too much, you're making too much small talk. Cut the guacamole and get to the content. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I not going quickly enough for you? I'm sorry, because we're all here for whatever the hell, Jacob 254519 with an exclamation point. I'm sorry that we're not getting there fast enough for you. It's like I said, it's that thing of, well, what do you want to call it? Front desk energy is what I call it. It's that thing of so whoever's leaving this has this idea that the person they're leaving a comment for actually cares. Like, YouTube gives you the ability to give me your opinion. I don't have to internalize any of that. I don't know, guys. I don't know if you guys have noticed this or anybody who may have met me. In real life, I don't care about people's opinions. I hate to tell you, but online commentary is just not, that's not the way. In fact, if you're going to do it, at least make me laugh, to Chris's point. At least make it funny, right?
Yeah.
Now, Chris does this thing where as a grown man, he's in here drinking Pedialyte. There's no children in this house, and yet he has a stash of it. In fact, when he shared an abode with Reed Ferguson, he would always be like, man, can you score me some of that Pedialyte from...
Pedialyte's delicious.
First of all,
good
that's
to
a damn
prevent.
lie.
No, good to prevent hangovers.
So Chris has reached, guys, we joked about it in the show recently. Chris got married and now all of a sudden he's drinking Pedialyte before he drinks because he's trying to prevent a hangover. Told you, man, once you get married, it's all downhill from here. Your life, you can't anticipate the way your life is going to change now. This is one of them.
No, I've been on the Pedialyte train for a while now.
No, I know that. I just wanted to hear you admit that into a microphone. You've been drinking Pedialyte since childhood, and you never stopped.
No, I never had it as a child. Or I don't recall having it as a child.
Worse. How did you not have Pedialyte as a child, and now as an adult you decided it's time to get on the train?
I don't know. Blame my parents. I just don't ever remember having Pedialyte.
It's disgusting. We were talking about how I took it before the COVID shot because someone lied and told me and my wife that, oh no, if you drink this stuff, it'll totally it'll reduce the side effects. It did not, and that stuff is disgusting. It's somehow salty and sickeningly sweet at the same time. And yet Chris goes, I don't think it's that bad. For a cocktail connoisseur such as yourself, how is your palate that much of a mess?
You know what the weird thing is I've talked to Jessica about it. Of people that enjoy bourbon on the regular, how much of them also enjoy a cup of black coffee? A good amount.
Yeah.
Not me.
Okay.
I don't drink coffee at all. The taste of coffee is not good.
But you like coffee liqueur. If it's in a cocktail.
I've never had a coffee liqueur dominant cocktail.
So you've never had just a cup of black coffee?
I've tried black coffee. It's not for me. Like I'll have what is it, a White Russian? I don't mind them. The Big Lebowski drink.
Yeah.
Don't mind them.
So what do you drink in the morning when you wake up?
I don't drink anything in the morning. If like I'm at home, I might have like orange juice if we have it. That's about it.
I didn't know this about you, and I don't know what to I don't know what to say about that. I almost don't trust another human being who doesn't need just a little bit of caffeine in order to start their day, not in I don't even want to call it a funk. It's more like there's just a fog that hangs over you until you get that first little kick. And you somehow you're fairly low energy, though, most of the time. Right?
Yeah.
He goes, yeah. Yeah, sure. I bet you he runs laps around this place when no one's around.
That's also possible. You want to know something else that's going down? Apologize if we're running long on small talk.
Yeah. Oh, no, now I'm doing it just to annoy that guy.
I doubt he watches again. Jessica made me watch Donnie Darko. So I've watched Donnie Darko.
So you made it in.
And we're gonna try to do a movie a week. And then I'm gonna also take notes on it.
So she's... See? You've been married less than a full... Actually, as of 3 hours, 2 hours? An hour? Maybe even 45 minutes.
30 minutes from now, it'd be a week.
It will be one full week, and she is already changing your life for the better. Round of applause, people. Round of applause. Chris's wife, hands down, best thing that's ever happened to you.
Cool.
Hands down. She's broadening your horizons. Now, Donnie Darko was an idiot's film. Anybody who tells you it's deep or meaningful, they're a moron.
I gave it a C.
Yes.
And I said I liked it better when it was called Back to the Future 2.
That movie can kick rocks. Every kid my freshman year of college was like, oh, did you see Donnie Darko? Yeah, but you got to think about it, man. I'm like, no, you're just high. You're just stoned. That's the only reason you think any of this is deep. Oh, that's amazing.
No, it was like, a plane engine hit this kid's room and he died. But for the whole movie, he's alive and it's a different universe. Okay, so it's Back to the Future 2 when Biff went back in time and took the almanac to himself, and then they went to the alternate 1985 that was only Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox knew that was not the right year. When he fucking jumps the fence and goes into that black family's house.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be his.
Almost gets shot?
Yeah.
Almost gets shot.
Yeah, and then ends up at Biff Tannen's casino. Yeah, that's Donnie Darko is Back to the Future 2. That's what it boils down to.
As far as intro discussions to a podcast about football goes, that might be the best thing I could have hoped for to come out of this conversation is that Donnie Darko sucks.
Yeah.
And it's Back to the Future 2.
How was the first 10 minutes of the Rockpile Report? They talked about Pedialyte and Donnie Darko.
Oh, I'll tell you what, if I win the Powerball, that's essentially I become Biff Tannen who owns the casino. Like if I had won that $500 million in a Powerball thing, I'm Biff Tannen who owns the casino and there's nothing anyone can do to stop me at that point. Now, with that said, we are here to talk about a little football. All of our draft content's coming up over the course of the next month. We've got guys like E.J. Snyder, Matt
Waldman.
Well, I was going to say Mark and then Matt, and I got them conflated because they both do like joint quarterback reviews. Matt Waldman, Mark Schofield. Nate Geary wants to come in for that. I still want to try to find Mark Schofield's quarterback tape. I swear to God, I'll start scouring the internet.
Brett Nietzsche can probably find it.
Well, this is it. We need to find his quarterback tape so that we can do like a Matt Waldman QB room and just make make Mark sit there and listen to it. Mark has to be on the show, and all he can do is sit there and shake his head. We've got our usual panel draft guests here to talk about the class, but realistically, we put our spin on it. It's more just a Q&A session. Because Chris, draft prognostication, like I think that's the thing everyone hates about this type of year, right? It's just all projections and guesses. So rather than try to have conversations structured around that, I like to talk about what is, and I like to talk about themes that are tangible. And one of them, like we're going to tonight, is just doing a roster comparison of where we were last year at this exact time. You know, almost how, like we were just saying, last week at this exact time, you were gearing up to get married. Last year at this time, the Bills roster looked really different than it does right now. And then it also looked really different than it did week 1 of the NFL season. And I think it's interesting to see how that took shape. Now, it's no secret that the Bills lost a lot of name players in the last calendar month. Some were cost related, which is just plain and simple. Some it was age and deteriorating play. And some were just the team hedging their bets, right? I'm a cold person when I have to be. Professionally, like, you can't work with finance and money and make decisions like that if you're not willing to be cold and calculated and take emotion out of some decisions that get made. And, like, it still hurts as a Bills fan to watch it happen to your team. And in the face of all of this, there's a reflex, and I've seen a lot of you do it out there on social media. It's been talked about on podcasts. People assume that things have to get worse. Change is bad, right, Chris?
Allegedly.
It's the type of thing where you say, well, I've lost, the windows are closing, the sky is falling. I've lost players who I'm comfortable with, and there are going to be new people wearing their jersey doing that thing. So you assume that new means bad. Or that new means that it would be harder for these incoming people to replicate what already existed. And so many new faces, and in some cases, philosophical shifts happening all at the same time. That's why I think it's already happening. We're already being bombarded with draft conversation. And it's going to get worse over the next month and a half as we get closer to it. I think you need to have a couple cocktails, get a couple drinks into your skull, and just take stock of what we have right here and now. And I think the best way to do that is, like, look at what you had. If you're trying to say, like, oh my God, things are going to come off the rails, we're not a team that's going to be capable of at least replicating what we did last year, which is be in a tight game in the AFC divisional game against the Super Bowl champion. Okay. I don't know what to tell you. You can believe that, or you can take a look at it and kind of follow me down this path. Now, I'm looking at this. I will say this. Things aren't great, right? There's going to be positions where younger or less heralded players are going to need to be coached up, and they're going to need to step up. And then there's obviously positions where the team is just going to tread water, where the changes that they made really they're not upgrades, they're maybe not downgrades, it's just kind of the status quo as of today. Like, and then there's somewhere I think we might have actually improved. Like, if we're going to start somewhere, I'd start, like, if I want to make that point, look at our linebacker core, Chris. Like, if you want to pull up ourlads.com, just take a look at it. Now, I already did the work, but I can tell you, and most savvy fans would understand, our linebacker core, say what you want, but right now, if you look what we're taking into the season, you've got starters in Terrell Bernard and Matt Milano, who both proved that they can make splash plays at any moment. We know what Matt Milano is. He's an all-pro caliber player. Terrell Bernard showed last year he has Pro Bowl talent. If and when the defensive line they're smaller linebackers, so they're going to need some cover. And I think that's why the team made a point to invest in experienced one-tech D tackles. But you look at this now, you've got a Dorian Williams who last year was too green to really be trusted, but at the same time, he flashed. He showed that he understands run fits. He's athletic enough to defend the line in the running game from tackle to tackle. And at the same time, he can get out in space. Now, if they can teach him coverage, he's got the athletic chops to do it as a backup at an NFL level. Then they bring in Nick Morrow, another guy who is an athletic backup who has also worn the green dot. So now you don't have to. He's an upgrade from what's his face, Andre Lee, and then who else? Who was the guy who stepped in last year? I'm blanking on his name.
Yeah, I'll just pull it up on the.
Yeah, that's what I love about our lads. You can go back to any point in time, guys. For anybody who's doing this type of stuff, if you don't use our lads, you're doing a lot of heavy lifting for nothing. You can pick a point in time and just go see the roster. Terrell Dodson. Nick Morrow is an upgrade athletically from Terrell Dodson. And even though he's not a guy who I would love in my starting lineup, he's still better than what we would be trotting out there if something were to happen to Terrell Bernard as our play caller, or if something were to happen to a Matt Milano or something along those lines. And then we still have Balin Spector. You've maintained the status quo in terms of linebacker play in your special teams unit, but you've gotten better in terms of your potential starting depth. You throw a few camp bodies at this position, you're going to be perfectly fine. You literally don't have any additional need here. Undrafted free agents could make out the rest of this position. And I think for as many people think the defensive tackle room is a problem, the Bills have done enough, right? They've done enough to get you to a place where if you don't want to spend a ton of draft capital, if you want to take maybe a 5th round, 6th round flyer on a guy that you like with potential upside, you could do that. And no one would be mad about it. Now, you'd probably need to watch the waiver wire at cutdown day and see if there's anybody out there. But for the time being, you could head into camp with what we're going to have in the defensive tackle room, and no one would freak out about that. Deshaun Williams, Daquan Jones, Austin Johnson, Ed Oliver, Eli Ankou. You have a little bit of need at 3-tech, so you watch what's out there. The market's been picked fairly clean, but I still like what we have. And I think that when you look at what we had last year, it's pretty. I mean, I did the thing that I usually do. What I did was I took our lads, I took 2023, 2024, put them into Excel, merged them, and made a pivot table so I could see year for year, mashed up against each other, what do these depth charts look like when you try to compare them? And it's pretty, it falls in pretty stark contrast in terms of some position groups that just jump out to you. Better, worse. One of the things, Eli Ankou and Daquan Jones, not ideal as your one text, but now you bring me a Deshaun Williams with a little bit of upside, and I say, okay, that's better, because last year at this time we had Eli Ankou, Jordan Phillips, and Daquan Jones. So it's already reached a status quo. We're tied, I think. I don't think we could get worse at the position than we were at this time last year. And so in that way, everybody needs to calm down a little bit. And I also think you need to trust as we kind of go through this exercise, you need to trust our GM, considering we're a team that hasn't lost in the wild card round since 2019. And we've made the playoffs every single year. Chris, you'd sign up for that if I told you that you had a GM and a coaching staff that can at least get you to the divisional round every year.
After those 18 years in purgatory? Yes.
You'd say, hey,
get me to the playoffs every year.
We'll roll the dice every year, and if a few bounces go our way, we're there. Now, you take a look at the rest of the roster. I want to start with defensive end, and I'm going to lead with it because it's a pretty solid example of why this exercise is important. People hear defensive end and say, what? The Bills were good at defensive end in 2023, and now we're missing guys. But if you go back to April, you want to zoom in on that a little bit, Chris, down there in the lower right-hand corner? If you go back to last April, these were the names in the Buffalo Bills lineup. Greg Rousseau, Boogie Basham, Kingsley Jonathan, AJ Epinesa, and Von Miller coming off of an ACL tear. Basham got traded before camp. Jonathan was used kind of here and there, but wasn't trusted as a regular starter in the lineup. He's clearly still raw as a pass rusher, and that's why they hesitated to give him run and instead just ran Von Miller back out onto the field as soon as he could. We all knew Von was going to start the season like in some sort of a limited capacity. And so when you look at it that way, we went into the season last year with 4 healthy defensive ends on the roster as of this point, right here today in early April. I mean, obviously the room took shape. Shaq Lawson was signed mid-April for around veteran minimum right before the draft, which kind of signaled that they weren't going to be drafting one just for depth purposes. It's a thing they like to do. They like to shore things up so that they're not pigeonholed into having to take a guy, saying, oh man, we better give up a top 90 pick for a D-end simply because we need a body. Brandon Beane has done a really good job of putting us in a position where that's not necessary. Also, it's worth noting that the team's leader in sacks last year, Leonard Floyd, wasn't even on the roster until June 5th, right? A full month after the draft had settled. So it's impossible to look at what we have right now and say that it isn't at least as good as what we had at 2023 at this point. Greg Rousseau, a healthier Von Miller, Cameron Klein, AJ Epinesa, Casey Toohill, and Kingsley Jonathan. I mean, you've got Von with a full off season of work and a chance to really kind of get something back, to get something of himself back. Because, I mean, last year he was just an empty shirt. There's no way to sugarcoat the lack of impact he had. And I almost think that if they had more healthy bodies at the position, we may not have seen him until mid-October. But unfortunately, you trade Basham and you're looking at your depth chart and you're going, well, Kingsley Jonathan isn't a pass rusher and we need something. We might as well trust Von if he says he's ready to go. Hopefully he finds a little bit. No one's expecting a rebound, but at least he needs to give us something. But that's better than unavailable. It's better than knowing he will not be available. Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa. If those end up being your starters, quote unquote, isn't that basically where we were last year, Chris?
Sounds like it. Except
now we know that we already have the Shaq Lawson replacement in the building, which is Casey Toohill. So we already know that unless there's a premium talent available at the position, if that's what they do with the 28th pick, I don't see them doing a whole lot more. But at the same time, that's okay. You're already starting with a solid baseline. And now you can either go from, like I talked about in my solo pod last week, talking about maybe using that 28th pick to just send the fan base into screaming temper tantrums and drafting a defensive end with that pick, to doing what you did last year. And after the draft's over, there's going to be a bunch of veterans out there just walking around looking for somewhere to ply their trade. And you, as a GM who's not afraid of void years and kind of understands how to juggle cap to future years and how to work around your existing timeline, you might be able to swing a deal for a type of veteran defensive end pass rusher that, Chris, right now it's shocking that the market isn't moving for some of these guys. If I pull this up here and I just look at the active free agents as of today as edge players, Carl Lawson, Yannick Ngakoue, Emmanuel Ogba, there are guys. Jerry Hughes is still out there.
What about Clelin Ferrell?
No, somehow he got signed. Somehow Clelin Ferrell has a job and Yannick Ngakoue doesn't. Because these are guys who are waiting for their right fit. And so when this happens, there's going to be teams, they're probably looking, saying, listen, we're not getting any younger. Yannick Ngakoue is 28 years old, and he's already on, I think, his third team. He's probably just looking to go play somewhere on a short contract that he thinks he can be competitive. Welcome to Buffalo if you want to be here, baby. We wanted you when you were a free agent. It's all up to the GM, but there are options. And I think that we're basically where we were last year, even if the more radical parts of the fan base don't want to believe it. And the fact that they already got what looks like, at least in terms of pass rush, an upgrade in Casey Toohill, over Shaq Lawson, I'd like to say we're ahead of the game. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a verdict that we are better right now than where we were last year at defensive end. The tight end position. This is kind of a no-brainer, isn't it? Last year, Dawson Knox got hurt, or back in 2023, there was a game where Dawson Knox was questionable to play. Quentin Morris was questionable to play. And the question was, do we actually have an NFL tight end to put on the football field? We might have to go into a game with 0 healthy tight ends. And that's their fault. I mean, our depth chart was Dawson Knox, Quentin Morris, and something called Zach Davidson. Anybody who doesn't know, that's a pair of undrafted free agent players on the Bills roster and a starter who, outside of touchdowns, hasn't been talked about as being in the, upper echelon of yards, receptions, catch percentage at the tight end position. You had a massive hole in your roster. You fast forward to 2024, Dalton Kincaid, Quentin Morris, Dawson Knox as of today. That's a no-brainer, isn't it?
I like it.
Chris could tell you that the tight end room now is better than last year's tight end room at this point, right?
Yes.
Pre-draft? Hell yeah. One of the more polarizing positions is defensive back. Anytime you lose 3 players who all qualified as an all-pro, or like an all-pro alternate, you're going to feel it, right? Like it sticks with you a little bit because most guys who play on teams like that, those are the people who you're buying their jerseys. Chris, Trey White, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde. If you had to guess at a percentage of our fan base right now today who attend football games, would you say it's fair? Because obviously Von Miller, Josh Allen, there's a ton of throwbacks. If you looked at all of the jerseys in the stands on a given game day, where would you put the percentage of them that are either Trey White, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde?
I'd probably put them behind Allen and Diggs.
Sure. Diggs, Von, Allen, but then who? Milano?
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't get the linebacker jerseys. I'll never understand that.
Probably it's your fault. Please tell us why you have a Sam Cowart jersey.
Sam Cowart's the best. What I should do is my love for linebackers. I should get I really should get a damn it. I'm picturing him in the West Her commercial and I can't his name.
Dawson Knox?
No.
Tasker.
I was saying Steve Tasker. I was saying Steve Tasker.
I forget he played linebacker.
Dude, best linebacker of my lifetime. Never mind all those touchdowns. Anytime you lose a bunch of players who I would say, I think 10%, like 10%, because that's a good number. There's a million jerseys, but 10 to 15% of the people in the stands on a given Sunday for the Bills have one of those 3 jerseys on. And now those players aren't on your team. There is an emotional cost to that. There's a hand wringing. It's reflexive. You can't help but do it. And Chris, I think a lot of us are still carrying around some of the scar tissue from it's February 10th. I got to hear my notes. February 10th, 2000. That was the day the Bills unceremoniously cut Bruce Smith, Thurman Thomas, and Andre Reed in a single afternoon. It was literally a month and a half after the home run throwback ruined what could have been a Super Bowl run. We had the NFL's best defense. Like, we could have made a serious run at the Super Bowl that year. And one shitbag play and so you absorb that blow, which is like for a lot of us as young people at the time. I think I was 13 years old, and it was part of my formative experience as a fan. And then you you dive from that moment headfirst into, as a kid, going, wait, what do you mean Bruce Smith isn't a Buffalo Bill anymore? What?
Plays for the Redskins.
It's like, wait, what? Thurman Thomas? Where is he going? The Dolphins? No! Ah! And now you're 13, 14 walking around going, well, life is bullshit. Obviously nothing matters. This might be the type of thing that drives someone to write a movie like Donnie Darko.
Makes sense.
And a life experience like this. Like, I got a quote here. Buddy Nix was a scout for the Bills at the time. He was quoted as saying, of that day when they cut everybody, he said, I just wanted to get the hell out of that building. I told John, he was talking about John Butler, the GM, this is way above my pay scale. I hate this part of the game. And just like, he was like, I had to go home. I couldn't. He's like, I didn't want to look anybody in the eyes. It's brutal. That's the frame of reference I have for what took place this offseason, right? These guys who they cut are the caliber of player that they've done things for this franchise you're going to remember and talk about 10, 15, 20 years from now. Because they were a part of what was the turnaround. They were a part of something special here. But if we take all of that emotion out of this, and you want to be cold, and you want to be calculated, and you want to be unemotional, our safety tandem was going to be the oldest in the NFL if we ran it back. We would have been the oldest safety tandem in football by a pretty sizable margin if we had run it back from last year. Neither of them was 100% all season long. Poyer, Iron Man, but you saw what happened, him playing through all those injuries, and you saw the toll that it took. He just was no longer explosive. And the big splash plays stopped coming because even though he knows where he needs to be, he just physically can't get there as quickly as he used to anymore, or with as much disruption as he used to. His ability to beat younger, faster players to a football just no longer existed. Hyde, he may want to consider retirement. I mean, I've seen it floated where Bean's like, well, we'd be open to having him back, whatever. Damian Harris just retired after suffering a similar neck injury and being carted off the field here in Buffalo. And he retired. Probably because the medical information he was getting wasn't good. And there probably wasn't a lot of teams out there willing to put him on the football field. And Brandon Bean's saying all the right things, like, well, we'd be open to him coming back if it all makes sense. Chris, that's a nice out to build into that.
Yeah.
That's like, oh yeah, I'd be open to getting together with my ex-girlfriend if she could just unsleep with a bunch of homeless people. The funny thing is, that's not slander because it's provably true. But the point remains. It's not good. The team had to do something. And so we kind of knew like a youth movement was coming. We just didn't think it would come. We thought it would come with a scalpel, not an axe. And now you see this, like they get Edwards, who, say what you want, I don't love the move. There again, like I might be a little hyperbolic about his signing. I watched him get cooked by James Cook in that Kansas City game where he was just in the wrong place and just miscommunicating with the people around him. KC fans didn't love him. He had a penchant for turnovers, which is good. And that's probably what McDermott likes about him. They're like, oh, well, he's an instinctive football player. He'll make a good, strong safety who can make plays on the ball that Jordan Poyer used to make. Because he's, 6 years younger?
Makes sense.
That makes sense. Meanwhile, you've got Taylor Rapp on the roster as of today. Lieutenant Colonel Justin Uhlberg made what I think is the best comment about Taylor Rapp. He goes, I'm happy with Rapp in that in the way you would be happy about using artillery danger close. He goes, yeah, when you do it, you're going to kill the enemy. But also, he's like, I'm just as likely to hurt a friendly or something ugly is going to happen from time to time. That's the case of if you turn over a starting job to Taylor Rapp, that's what you're dealing with. And it doesn't sound ideal, but I think we've been spoiled, right? We've been spoiled and running the status quo back wasn't in the cards. So here we are. At this time last year, we were really excited for the return of Poyer and Hyde, while also acknowledging that neither of them was going to be exactly what they were before. And even if we didn't acknowledge it, you probably should have. At cornerback, we were bringing back a Trey White that we hoped, with fingers and toes crossed, that he was going to return to form. And you said, okay, maybe this can be it. He showed okay down the stretch, and then you heard all the encouraging stuff all offseason about training camp and how his knee looked good and all this stuff was going well and trending in the right direction. You hoped that he was going to stay healthy. And he didn't. You had Dane Jackson, who everyone agreed in this fan base, if you could get in a time machine, everybody here wanted Dane Jackson upgraded on. There was a lot of people upset that he was still a part of the roster. They didn't understand why this team kept giving him chances when he was average at best. Not realizing that average at best for a third string backup in the NFL, Chris, you could do a lot worse. Like Kyrie Elam didn't have to see the field a ton, specifically because you had Dane Jackson. That was a boon to you. You had him, but again, we all agree he was upgradable. And then you had Kyrie Elam, who nobody trusted. If we're being honest and just cold about all of this, which is the purpose of this exercise, there was a lot of hoping wrapped up in everything we were doing with our defensive back group outside of Teron Johnson last year. Teron Johnson, even Christian Benford, you were rolling him out there as a starter going, man, I hope last year wasn't just a fluke. Like, I hope that this guy is the goods. And it's not just, like, Chris, can you think of a famous Bills one-year wonder? There's been a ton of them. I'm just trying to think of one off the top of my head.
Not really. Like,
not recently, anyway.
Well, when I hear, I'm going to pull up their stats right now, but the one that comes to my mind was Peerless Price.
I was going to say Peerless Price or Josh Reed. You remember him?
Oh, yeah. He went to LSU.
Bolitnikoff winner, Josh Reed.
So here we go. Look at this. Here's Peerless Price's stats. So he had the 1,200 yards receiving, and
9 touchdowns.
Yeah, and then he was a free agent and went to Atlanta and went back to being a nobody.
Yep.
That might be it.
So this is so we were basically trying not to get emotionally invested in what we were hoping was not a Peerless Price situation. Fast forward to this year. You look at what we have. We are going into the NFL draft with Rasul Douglas and Christian Benford, who have proven that as a tandem, they can play football at a high level. Remember last year down the stretch was supposed to be the murderer's row.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? We've got Rasul Douglas and Christian Benford. They were more than up to the task. They did well enough to get us to the divisional round of the playoffs. And we didn't lose down the stretch of the season against some of the stiffest competition that was on our schedule. I mean, you look at this. I mean, everything that they did well. They thrived in our zone coverage schemes. They put up a number of respectable top 25, top 30 rankings in various metrics like yards after the catch allowed, completion percentage allowed. In man coverage, neither one of them was a gross liability. Teron Johnson remains one of the game's steadiest defensive backs at a position like nickel corner that gives the Bills an incredible amount of flexibility. He's been incredibly durable. Like, if you look, Chris, like, pull up that chart. You look at what we have at the nickel cornerback position. Last year, we were going into it with Teron Johnson and Saron Neal. Now we have Teron Johnson and Cam Lewis listed as nickel corners. The team trusts Cam Lewis more than they did Saron, which is why he's here. Last year, Saron was supposed to be the number 2, and he lost all of his defensive snaps to Cam Lewis. So already we're ahead of the game because we have room on the depth chart, and at the same time, you're talking about a group of players who, like, their level, they've established what their level is. There isn't a hope. It's just we understand what this group can be and does. And then you throw in backups like Damar Hamlin, who we don't know what his acclimation is to the NFL now that he's going into his 3rd pro season. And then you look at what behind him are just a bunch of names. Jamarcus Ingram might be the most interesting of the depth pieces because if you think back to that game where they had to pull Kyer Elam in Jacksonville, they put Jamarcus Ingram in over him. And it did, to a certain degree, stop the bleeding, at least enough for the Bills to make it a close game. The reason they keep bringing him back is because I think that there's one, he's cost controlled and he can't go anywhere else. But also there's kind of an understanding of like, we like this guy's skill set in this scheme. Whether or not we think he's good enough to be on the actual roster, that's neither here nor there. We like what he does for our franchise. If you look at where we are in terms of depth, I mean, last year we had, 15 bodies on the roster. And right now we only have 11. At the same time, those 11 players that we have in the cornerback, defensive back room are known quantities, more so than anything we were walking into April with at the defensive back position. So in that way, Chris, I have to say that we're at least able to maintain the status quo from last year, don't you believe?
Yeah, seems like it.
With the ability to potentially be better. One of the last ones we'll talk about, because I want to switch sides to the offense. The interior offensive line. There was a decision made to move on from both Mitch Morse and Ryan Bates in the same week. And I think that caught a lot of people by surprise. And when I say a lot of people, I mean literally everybody. I remember Bruce Nolan losing his shit about it. Just being like, well, this is not... I wanted change. I didn't want this change. It's easy to look at that trio from 2023 and be comfortable with it. You know, when you go back to our depth chart, Chris, if you want to scroll down here. So let's take a look. If you just looked at, let's say, the guard position, or let's look at center. 2023, you had Mitch Morse, and even though they listed Greg Manns, it really Ryan Bates slots in there. And right now you have Connor McGovern and Will Clapp. And it's easy to look at that and go, well, that's a clear step backwards. Understand it. I understand why you might feel that way. And then you look at the guard position and say, okay, at left guard last year it was Connor McGovern and David Edwards. This year it's David Edwards and Alec Anderson, who was a college free agent in 2022. And you say, well, that sounds like a downgrade. And then at right guard, you look at what we have over there, and we've got the sophomore. Last year it was going to be, what did they have listed? Last year it was Ryan Bates, Ike Butker, Osiris Torrance. Ryan Bates was kind of presumed to be the starter, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And then he lost his job in camp to Torrance. Torrance looks pretty damn good as a rookie. The expectation is he'll at least maintain status quo, maybe build on that a little bit. So now you have this room of him, some guy named Kevin Jarvis, which I'm sure they will do something else on the interior offensive line when it comes time to add veterans. But realistically, if you're taking a look at what we have now compared to what we had then, the interior offensive line went from Butker and Bates, Mitch Morse, Connor McGovern, a rookie, to McGovern, Torrance, Edwards, Clapp, Jarvis, and Anderson. The thing that I want people to remember is that Ike Butker and Ryan Bates, when they were starters, I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember this, I'm sure you are, they were starters on one of the worst pass-protecting offensive lines that Josh Allen has ever played behind. I'm counting the 2018 line that was one of the cheapest in the entire NFL. Remember that? Their whole offensive line was worth less than what Taylor Lewan was making that season?
Oh, yeah.
I think that was the year we lost in the AFC title game to the Chiefs, where they just smothered our offense with a pass rush. Because Ryan Bates and Ike Butker just were not up to the task of being pass protectors in an NFL level. We've upgraded the offensive line since then. And if that's the case, these guys don't have a place here. And if they're going to be more expensive, and we're a cash-strapped football team, then sometimes you got to make moves. So these were all things we had no choice but to do. Now, the interesting thing is that McGovern was everything that he was touted to be. Solid pass protector, subpar run blocker. which is fine because isn't that kind of what Morse has been his whole career here?
Yeah.
Good pass protector, really didn't give you much in the running game. No one will ever confuse him for Eric Wood or for some of the other like solid centers we've had here throughout Bills history. Meanwhile, Edwards kind of became a lineman they trusted. And there's this interesting statistical wrinkle that if you're in the analytics department over there at One Bills Drive and you have a GM who's asking you to squeeze two dimes together and make a quarter out of it on your offensive line, they're going to come to you and what they're going to tell you is that Mitch Morse was graded as the worst zone blocking offensive lineman on the Buffalo Bills starting lineup last year. He was the worst out of the interior. Zone runs have been basically the system for some of James Cook's most explosive running plays of the season. It takes advantage of the fact that everybody's spreading out their blocking. The running back is kind of playing off the blocking in front of him, and he's learned how to use his vision to see where the blocks are being set up for him and just flow around them, while also using his jump cut to just devastate people when linebackers think they can slide in behind a blocker and get him. And now he's off to the races. Zone blocking has kind of been the key to unlocking what James Cook is on the ground. And I'm not going to lie to you, Edwards had half the attempts of the rest of the interior offensive line, but he blew all of them out of the water in terms of his ability to execute in those moments. Like there's a play, I think in that Cowboys game, where they run it from 15 yards out and it ends up in the end zone. And Edwards makes his block and gets up, and he's already pointing to the end zone. And Josh Allen's pointing at him, and they're both pointing at the sideline, like, nice play call. That's awesome. Zone running is kind of, at least by the numbers and the analytics, the thing that is going to help James Cook continue to thrive and continue to grow. If you were looking to do this all on the cheap, you could do a lot worse than a cheap guy like Edwards who you learned how to trust. He got a year in the system and your offensive line coach likes him. You could do a lot worse. And then last year we had questionable upside at this point. 2023, there's concern over whether McGovern's going to fit or not. There's zero young players with starting upside. Questionable pass protection skills at multiple spots. And you have a rookie who you go, he looks good on paper, but I don't know what he is. Now you're entering April going, well, I need depth, but I know who my starters are, and I trust these guys. I trust them all to do their job. McGovern, maybe you have some questions there about whether or not he can truly man the pivot and do the communication that's necessary to do it. But I don't think that you would move a guy from guard to center if you didn't think he could communicate what he's seeing to the quarterback properly, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't do that. So with that, I mean, look at it this way. Edwards coming in, Cyrus Torrance coming back. We already have a better offensive line than any team in the AFC East is going to roll out this year. And you're still doing it on the cheap. I like on paper what we have this year better than what we were going into this phase of the season with last year. Because last year we didn't even know we were going to have Torrance. So this is what I mean, guys. It doesn't have to be terrible. And then Chris, I saved this one for last. Wide receiver. Now, Chris, if you were watching this on YouTube, you can see all of these charts broken down for you, the side-by-side analysis, just so you can do this yourself. Going into 2023, what do you think about the two depth charts lined up next to each other? Put yourself back here a year ago and tell me, what were your thoughts about most of the players on the roster?
I think the comparison is similar. Diggs, Davis, Shakir. Diggs, Shakir, now Curtis Samuel. I mean, I don't know if it's an upgrade. I don't think it's a downgrade. I call it right down the middle, very even, just like my political views.
Yeah, good luck with that. Chris, there are lies, there are damn lies, and then there's you making that statement right there. That's hilarious to me. what I'll say is this. You have one going into 2023, you had one high-level threat in Stephon Diggs. You had a touchdown machine who was inconsistent in Gabe Davis. You had a sophomore player in Khalil Shakir that you hoped would continue to grow because he showed some flashes at the end of a season, but they were kind of flash in the pan plays because he didn't get a lot of opportunities. I think he finished the regular season with 10 targets. That doesn't speak to a guy that the organization has really given a fair shake. Outside of that, you had a bunch of I don't know what. You had a Deontay Hardy who, if you're just looking at analytics, this is a film junkie's wet dream. Oh my God, Deontay Hardy in this offense, how he could do this and his explosion rate and his like all of these fancy numbers that analytics guys like to come up with when it comes to what could happen. It's like that thing that we all cry bullshit about when PFF talks about interceptable passes. Well, these balls could have been intercepted, so that should that should be held against the quarterback. Did it end up in someone's hands? No? Well, then go fuck yourself. It's the same way, it cuts the other way with Deontay Hardy, where it was like, look, on paper, this could be really cool if we use him properly and get him in the exact right situations. Too often, we were running go routes with one of the shortest players on the team. That was a Gabe Davis route, and we would give it to Hardy because our offensive coordinator thought he was smarter than everybody. And outside of that, you didn't have anything, right? You had Trent Sherfield, who you knew was a good special teamer and a run-blocking specialist. You had a bunch of guys, Keyshawn Johnson, Isaiah Coulter, and Desmond Patman. You can't do anything with that. Now you look at where we are in 2024. It's like you said, it's almost the same. Stephon Diggs, you still have one high-level player. Showing signs of slowdown, but can still be very, very good. Probably not elite, but very, very good. A third-year wide receiver who proved that he can be an impact player for you. Highest catch percentage in the NFL among qualifying receivers. That ridiculous touchdown catch in the loss to the Chiefs.
Yeah.
The fact that Josh threw that ball shows you he trusts that guy now. The number of his catches that went for first downs, like all of a sudden you found an impact player at the wide receiver position who can play outside and inside. You bring in Curtis Samuel, who's produced at a pretty even clip, regardless of what shitbag quarterback or coordinator he gets stuck with. Another run-blocking specialist and special teams contributor in Mac Hollins. Andy Isabella, who, I don't know, I love when everyone was calling for him because of a preseason game. Also, KJ Hamler. You want speed? He's got speed. He's at least faster than anybody we've ever brought in to just be a depth piece. Oh, by the way, last year's 5th-round pick. Yeah, he's still here. He's healthy, I hope. Now, you get a hamstring injury so bad that you miss a whole season of football, that sucks. Like, that's off the bone. It's a rough injury. It's hard for a guy who has to run. If he comes into this and he's healthy and he's worked on the jugs machine enough, this is a guy with size who, even if it's just like if our expectations are, this is a guy that maybe in the right set of circumstances he can be a gunner on punt coverage, which is kind of why he was brought in. But then also in the red zone, we could maybe give him some snaps to give us that Gabe Davis option that we lost. A big wide receiver with size. You've already set the table for all of the things that you had last year out of your wide receiver group. Not all these guys are going to make the team. Chris, if I told you look at the 2024 wide receiver depth chart right now, obviously everybody wants to see a star player added.
What was Mac Hollins?
What was Mac Hollins? Huh? Everybody wants to see a star player or an impact player added in this year's draft. At the same time, what I'm going to sit here and tell you is that if we went into, because they didn't do that last year, and if I look at what we had last year at this point versus what we have today, I would be comfortable if they chose not to take a first-round draft pick at wide receiver, and they took one in the second or even third round, which would set everybody on fire. Can you imagine if they had the W. Gerald Weiner line for that day?
No.
We may have to bring it back. I was going to wait until the start of the season, Chris, but maybe we do it. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, The Rockpile Report Winer line is going to be up and operational for this upcoming football season. Shout out to Vince, Lackawanna Vince, for giving me the idea.
Cool.
It's his idea, but maybe we bring it back for the draft. Maybe I'll set that up. That way, when we don't take a wide receiver in the first round, people can call in and just scream their frustrations at someone who isn't their family, and then we can listen to them and play the best ones on air. Maybe give away some swag. It'll be fun. Either way, what we have at wide receiver right now is already similar enough. Right? They're similar enough to what we had last year. And there's one thing that makes me think that this might even be able to work a little bit better on its own. I want to talk about not hoping, because last year we were hoping Gabe Davis would turn a corner and become more consistent. We were hoping Khalil Shakir would get more run, and he didn't. We were hoping that Deontay Hardy was going to be the Tyreek Hill speed piece that we were looking for. I want to talk about facts, not hopes, because that's what we were doing last season. I think if you've noticed, it's become a theme of where we were last year. We were hoping certain things would happen. Now we're no longer hedging our bets on that. I just want to talk about facts. The Bills were 4-3 after 7 games. Over that span, Diggs had 78 targets for 678 yards. That's a crazy pace. I want to say he finished like 5 of those 7 games with double-digit targets. Most wide receivers don't have that at all. Josh fed the one guy that he knew he could trust. Even despite that volume, though, and how good Diggs is, our offense was hit or miss. Some weeks it would show up, some weeks it would die on the vine. And in all of those close losses, it was a lack of consistency that kept biting us in the ass. Stephon Diggs can't save every game. He tried. Chris, you remember that touchdown at the end of the New England game that we lost? That's fucking crazy. The fact that he catches a ball, I think he set us up for the touchdown because he just caught it in the field. He looked like he was going to get tackled, and he just kept fighting for yardage to a point where he broke free and he was in the end zone, and everyone's like, wait, what just happened?
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, no, that's Stephon Diggs wanting to win a damn football game. Him and Josh want to win so badly, like they finally just both went nuclear at the same time. Even with that happens because you've committed the sin of having a coordinator disconnected from the depth on the depth chart and a quarterback who only trusted one player when shit got real. Now the Bills go in here with the tight end room upgrade. Obviously, Dalton Kincaid's going to be one of his favorite targets. You also have a Stephon Diggs, who even if he's not as explosive down the field as he used to be, he's still one of the... If you wanted to call him the best possession receiver in the NFL, I'll allow it. He's better than that, we know that, but if you want to diminish what his big play ability is now, he's still the catches he's making for 5, 6, 8 yards in coverage, one-handed away from his body. He's the best possession receiver in the NFL then, fine. We have that. We also have an explosive tight end. We also have an explosive player in the making, Khalil Shakir, who, like I said, proved both in execution on the field and the numbers and the uptick in usage that he's now trusted. Oh, and by the way, you also threw in a guy who, again, with a million terrible quarterbacks and a million terrible games coordinated by just dog shit coaching staffs, Curtis Samuel found a way to make impacts season after season after season. You're a more well-rounded team that's deeper with like NFL experienced talent at this position that you need. And now you've got a bunch of guys, right, that Josh can look at and that Joe Brady can look at and say, I can work with this and build the structure of an offense. And oh, by the way, this is one of the deepest wide receiver classes in years, so this has the ability to grow on top of that. I don't see how anyone could look at last year's depth chart at this point in the year and then look at what we're doing here today and try to convince me that we aren't better off than we were last year. I just think that with the understanding of the personnel you've added, who you have coordinating the offense. Now, Chris, I'd almost say this puts more pressure on Joe Brady.
Yeah.
This is where you look at it and say, look, you have a decent, you have similar to what we had last year in terms of talent at the wide receiver position. I'd argue maybe a little bit more experienced and a little bit more reliable. We also have the ability to add a premium asset in the pass catching department. The job is yours now, newly minted offensive coordinator Joe Brady. You're no longer interim. The job becomes yours to make all those pieces work in concert. Because we haven't had consistency or execution on that front since Brian Dable. I think that's where this entire thing rests. Realistically, there are so many parts of this roster that are just as good, if not a little more sound. I don't want to say better because people go, oh, well, there's been no upgrade. No, but philosophically, if you think about adding NFL experience and just physical talent compared to, you didn't go out and get a guy in Nick Morrow who, Nick Morrow's not going to blow the doors off anybody, but he's a guy who makes sure that you don't have to make the decision to start AJ Klein in a playoff game. Because you've got a guy who can wear the dot, who's also athletic enough to do some of the things you need a linebacker in that position to do. I just look at this and I say, this is where all of the pressure to this falls on your front office over the course of the next month to navigate the free agency process and add the little bit of sweetening in free agency that you might need. There's maybe one more big fish out there at the end that if you can structure a contract properly, void years, you've got all kinds of mechanics that we know Brandon Beane is familiar with. You can really kind of put the finishing touches on something that you build through the draft. But right now, they've managed to do the thing that they always do ahead of the draft, which is get out in front of their needs and at least make sure that what their roster looks like today at the start of April is better than, I don't want to say better, but at least sound enough that there won't be alarms ringing if they can't hit a specific position in the draft. And anybody telling you anything else, any podcast you listen to, anybody you see on social media who wants to tell you that, oh my God, it's going to be a giant miss if the Bills don't do X in the first 2 rounds. You can listen to that if you want to, but guys, I think we've all been here long enough. I've done enough of these podcasts. Chris, I feel so old behind this microphone.
I know.
I feel like
our birthday's coming up. We're gonna be 9. We're gonna be 9 in June.
I wonder when I'm 60 when the doctors look at me and go, Christ, what happened to your liver? You're like, buddy, I had a podcast. You can go watch it on YouTube. It still exists. I feel like I've sat behind this microphone for years having these conversations. Just talking and prognosticating and bloviating and talking about what could be. I feel like this conversation and this exercise was the first thing I've done in a long time where it's like I'm tired of hoping. I just want to look at facts. I just want to look at what is and ground myself to that. And this made me really happy because as I ground myself to what is and not what we hope, there's not a lot of question marks on the roster. Sure, you're going to question, where's my pass rush going to come from? Okay, it's fair. But you did shore up your D-tackle spot to a certain degree. And if there's somebody who wants to come in and give you a little bit of juice as a rookie pick, or depending on how the draft falls, maybe you're forced to take a guy at that position, whether it's edge rusher, defensive tackle, who gives your pass rush a little bit of juice. Great. If it's free agency, so be it. If it's we don't have questions, or at least nearly as many as we did last year in terms of pass rusher. Maybe it's that you don't trust Connor McGovern to be the center you need him to be. But you know that he can basically give you, in terms of blocking, what Mitch Morse was. So, really, I don't know. I mean, if you want to worry about the locker room stuff and the intangibles, you can. But again, I've sat here for too long and had too many of those conversations, only to find out that none of it matters. None of it matters. this podcasting thing, Chris. I feel like to be doing it for as long as we have, if you're not learning from the past and you're not at least trying to change your approach or taking what you've learned, and you're just going to keep doing the same thing. Like if we sat here right now doing mock drafts, like, oh man, let me do a mock draft and tell you why this exercise is important. Like you're going to do that for how many years before you realize this is all just, you're just filling up the air with nothing.
So we just did for an hour.
Yeah, but I'd like to think it's more rooted in reality than most of the postulation that we've done for the last 9 years.
All right.
I can't wait for all this to be over. In fact, I can't wait for football to come back, but unfortunately, we don't get that. So the draft is the next big thing I have to look forward to. And in that way, we will be here each and every week with a little bit of draft content, a little bit of our own, the Bills news update every week, which is always tongue-in-cheek. It's always mean. But if you're into that kind of thing, we'll be here for you. With that said, we got to get out of here, Chris. I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Kruger. This has been your Rock Pile Report.